The best way to lose money is to overpay on day one. And it's also the most understandable way, because to be in our business, Gary, you know this, everybody knows this, you have to be an optimist. Development is tough, business is tough. Being an entrepreneur requires, kind of a can-do optimistic spirit. But optimism can get the best of all of us. It can tell us that, those 5% increases we've had for the last 10 years in our rents are going to continue for the next 5. And that may not be the case at all. So I'd say that the number one mistake with a bullet is overpaying. Number 2, right behind, is over-leveraging. Putting too much debt on a property. Works great in a bull market, but bull markets never last. The carousel always stops. And if you've got 70, 80% leverage, and the market drops like it did during the Great Recession by 40%, you're out of luck.
Welcome back to the Massive Passive Cashflow Podcast. I'm Gary Wilson, your host. I'm so glad to have back listening to the show or watching if you're doing that in recorded mode, video on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, you name it. We've got a great guest today, John McNellis, all the way from beautiful California, the Bay Area, man, one of my favorite places on the planet. So first of all, John, I really want to thank you for being here. I've read up about you. I've been so excited to interview, and I really appreciate the fact that you're taking time to talk with me and our wonderful audience,
No, well, thank you, Gary. It's a pleasure to be joining you over the net. Looking forward to our conversation.
You got it. Hey, you have a really awesome life story. Would you mind taking us back to when you first broke into going from university to the working world? What that was, and then what was the tipping point that got you into real estate? If you don't mind sharing that, give people some context.
Sure. Well, to give you the thumbnail sketch, my father died when I was a boy. My mother was a very smart woman, but not educated. But she started selling residential real estate at a time when everybody else was male in it. But she was so good at it, she became a broker, and then she had her own little brokerage company. And she was able to put us, without any extra money, but she was able to put my siblings and I through college. And so I had a little bit of a real estate background there. And I can remember one time as a little boy saying to my mom, "Gee, Mom, I want to be like you." And she said, "Oh, no, Johnny, you don't want to be selling houses. You want to be doing office buildings or something." So I said, "Okay." But I had that. But, when I went to the university, I had essentially no skills. In fact, my handwriting was terrible, but I was good at typing. And I liked the idea of being a journalism major because there wasn't any homework. So I majored in journalism in college because I always did like to write. Then one of the best decisions I ever made was my senior year of college. I decided, no, I don't want to be a journalist. I don't want to write about what other people do. I want to be the one doing stuff. But I had no talent. I was bad at science, and I really wasn't all that great a student. And so I decided, and I didn't want to go to work. I was kind of lazy. So I said, I'll go to law school, and I'll be like Perry Mason and try cases. And it looked so much fun in movies and TV. So I went to law school, a good law school, got out, got a job with a great law firm in San Francisco, and joined the litigation department. And then it was like a bad dream, Gary. It's like after a month, I said, "Oh my God, this isn't like the movies." These big law firms, it's just a war of paper, and fighting, where you learn how to become like a professional jerk. But fortunately, the firm was big enough; it had a real estate department, and so I went to the managing partner and I said, "Please, let me be a business lawyer. That's so much more fun." And ultimately, somebody quit, and so they let me start as a business lawyer. And they said, "We have a small developer practice. You can handle that because most of the business lawyers handle the money." Yeah. So I'm 25 years old, and I'm learning the real estate business from kind of a higher level from the law. Meanwhile, I liked real estate, and so when I was 24, I think I just got out of law school, I bought a duplex in Southern California in my hometown with my mother's help. I scraped together $1,500, and it's a terrible town, but it was an upmarket. So I think I paid $25,000 for it. A year later, sold it for 60,000. But
Nice.
I traded it into a fourplex for the 60. And then another
Mhm.
year later, that had bumped up to 120,000. We'd done the usual paint and petunias, just fix it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, I can stop right there and say, never, ever in my career ever since have I made any kind of return like $1,500 to $90,000.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was practicing law full time as a real estate lawyer, and then I was doing these little deals. We were buying houses, fixing them up, and selling them, on nights and weekends. A couple of friends and I, and then I kind of
Mhm.
graduated to what I thought were like lawyer deals, lawyer developments, and by that I mean no construction. So we
Mhm.
bought a fourplex in San Francisco in a great neighborhood, and I did the paperwork, and we converted it into condominiums.
Mhm.
And then I bought another property, a larger property that had two separate buildings on it. And I went to the city and I said, guys, this is a non-conforming use. If one of these burns down, I won't be able to rebuild it. Let's preserve the housing stock. It was a good argument. And
Mhm.
let me lot split. And so they agreed. And I was able to sell one building for about 70% of what I bought them both for. Then, so I was doing the little deals on the side, and then I had an older client. So I'm still in my late 20s. Guy was about 15 years older. He was a shopping center developer. He worked for a big company, and with him, I acted as his lawyer, and we built a couple of neighborhood shopping centers. And what I'm talking about are they're all over the country, 100,000 square feet, give or take, 10 acres, supermarket on one end, drugstore on the other, McDonald's, Bank of America, classic stuff. So we built a couple of those. His company went out of business, and they left us, or left him rather, a site that we had kind of tied up, but escrow had fallen out, and it was in a little town about an hour north of San Francisco called Healdsburg, which
Mhm.
this is more than 40 years ago. At that time, it was a blue collar town, nice, but nothing to write home about. Since, I'm sure most of your listeners have probably heard of it. It's right up there with the town of Napa. It's one of the most
Mhm.
shishi wine towns in Northern California. Anyway, excuse me,
Mhm.
my client was a good developer, but he was what you might call charismatically challenged. The guy,
Okay.
he could not sell snow cones in the desert. He just, he was good at the nuts and bolts of development, but he just couldn't sell. And as you
Mhm.
know, you've got to be able to sell. You've got to be able to tell a landowner, sir, your property's worth $5 a foot today as is. But if you allow me to tie it up for a year or 2 years and I can get a rezone, it'll be worth $10 a foot and I can pay you that much. And he just did
Mhm.
not have that skill set. So the center was kind of ready to go. I said, let me raise the money. And it was
Mhm.
$1 million, which, so that's like 4 or 5 million today, I guess.
Mhm.
And I was, young and dumb and optimistic enough to think, oh, how hard can it be to raise $1 million? Well, then I quickly learned. I felt after a little while, because I was raising money at $25,000 a chunk. So what does that make? 50 of them or
Yeah.
40, I got to get to that $1 million. So I started to feel like a bad actor in a bad off-Broadway play, just repeating my lines over and over
Mhm.
again. Anyway, that center was successful, and I was off to the races. We opened that in '83, so that was 43 years ago. And
Mhm.
so I just fell into becoming a shopping center developer. Stayed with that partner for half a dozen years, and then moved on. Took a couple of employees, and we started my firm, McNellis Partners. And so
Mhm.
we've done round numbers, almost 100 deals over the counting the little stuff I did before. Yeah, over almost 50
Yeah.
years, a couple deals a year.
Okay.
How's that for your thumbnail
That's
sketch?
pretty awesome. Yeah, that's a great. That sounds like a pretty great journey. I know. Obviously, there's a lot of details, a lot of lessons and wisdom in that 50 years too.
Yeah.
Um, so let's start here. I want to roll out some questions, and I'll try to be cognizant of the fact that there's a lot of you know, it's the iceberg. We're going to see that the 10% of the iceberg is above the water, and there's 90% that people are going to have to read the book to get the details. But let me ask you this: is a great question. Um, of all the ways to lose money, in this business, right? Because I know if I wrote a book on all the things that didn't go right, John, it'd be bigger than the books of all the things that went right. But thankfully, the things that went right far surpassed the ones that didn't. But what are some of the ways that people can easily lose money in this business? Hmm.
Well, you mentioned the book, so we might as well bring it out. So I always like to write. And so for 40 years, say, I was focused on being a businessman, a developer. But then I went back to writing. I did the first edition of Making It in Real Estate 10 years ago, second edition, 5 years. And it was a big seller, sold over 40,000 copies. It's taught nationwide at the best universities. In this third edition, which is right here, Making It in Real Estate. I actually add, 'cause I'm old enough, I don't care. I add a whole section on how to lose money.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Basically, I kind of detail in my worst mistakes and what I kind of jokingly refer to as my losing strategies. And so to answer your question, I think the best way to lose money is to overpay on day one. And it's also the most understandable way, because to be in our business, Gary, you know this, everybody knows this, you have to be an optimist. Development is tough, business is tough. Being an entrepreneur requires, kind of a can-do optimistic spirit. But optimism can get the best of all of us. It can tell us that, those 5% increases we've had for the last 10 years in our rents are going to continue for the next 5. And that may not be the case at all. So I'd say that the number one mistake with a bullet is overpaying. Number 2, right behind, is over leveraging. Putting too much debt on a property. Works great in a bull market, but bull markets never last. The carousel always stops. And if you've got 70, 80% leverage and the market drops like it did during the Great Recession by 40%, you're out of luck.
Want to learn what's working right now in real estate? Then don't miss Monday Night Live, happening every Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern. Each week, we bring you expert training on real estate investing, agent attraction, lead generation, marketing, and AI-powered strategies to help you work smarter and scale faster. You'll also hear inspiring success stories and lessons learned from some of the most successful real estate leaders and investors in the industry. Whether you're a brand new agent, a seasoned investor, or building a high-performing team, there's something valuable for you every single week. Learn, network, grow. Registration is completely free. Simply visit globalinvestoragent.com to reserve your seat for an upcoming Monday Night Live session. Join us this Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time and discover strategies you can put to work right away. We can't wait to see you there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. There's a really great guy. He's passed away. Bill Bartman was his name, and we call him Billionaire Bill Bartman. And he created us. Yeah, he's a really neat guy. I met him and I met his daughter too. The thing about Bill, he always remembered everybody. He might have met you one time 10 years ago. He will remember you, your name and everything about you. I don't know how he did it, but he created basically like a credit repair business and helping people get out of bad loans and things like that. And then unfortunately the government decided to pursue him because he was probably making too much money and in their eyes not paying enough taxes, although he's following the tax rules. In any case, long story short, he wrote created a famous CD, 10 ways to go out of business. And he said, number one is, spend more than they make. And number 2 through 10 were C number 1. So it just, the best wisdom in the world is always the simplest. But so the book, guys, and I'm going to brag on you a little bit, if you don't mind, John. So everybody listening, the book again, what's that?
I said, I'm fine with you bragging.
Okay, thanks. It's Making It in Real Estate. I'm familiar with the book. I've got the Audible, and it is actually required curriculum in some of the most major universities in the United States, places like Clemson, University of Maryland. Tell me some others. Those are the ones I'm familiar with myself, but
Stanford, Vanderbilt, UCLA, Georgetown, Cornell, Columbia, NYU. I've spoken at these schools in the past. When I did the first edition, I did a tour all the way across the eastern states, SMU in Texas. But anyway, thank you. I actually wrote the book. This is interesting. I wrote it for a smart 28 or 30-year-old, someone who was in the business but not a developer, a broker,
Right.
a banker, a lawyer, an architect, but someone who said, gee, I want to be at the top of the real estate food chain. I want to be a developer. And so I
Yeah.
wrote it with that person in mind. But then what happened was, as it turned out, the buying public, the professors picked it up, and so they teach it to the kids in the 20. It's usually in the grad schools, but
Yeah.
I spoke last night at Stanford to a graduate class.
Mhm.
And I think they might be a little young for it because some of it's a little complicated, but some of it's
Yeah.
fairly basic.
Well, I appreciate it. I hope everybody now you really understand why we have John on the show here and why you should get the book. I've got a degree in computer science, the furthest thing from real estate, and so it's just kind of ironic how I got here, but that's a different story for a different day. The bottom line is I value higher education. We have, I've had people say, why do we need colleges anymore? I'm like, well, not everybody can be an electrical contractor, a plumber, a roofer, and a million of other jobs. We need engineers and we need architects and we need doctors and lawyers and accountants, and those require degrees. So that if the best schools in the country are requiring a book, don't you think you should require it of yourself? I vote yes. I'll be your second for the listeners. You vote yes, and I'll vote yes. It'll be your second.
I like that. Thanks.
Yeah. So let's another good question here, and I've always this has been a pet peeve of mine for years. You know, you always hear the term passive investment. The real estate is a passive investment, and I'm like, passive by butt. It is anything but passive. Now, technically, it's just an accounting term that the IRS uses, but why is it? Why is that to me the biggest lie in the business?
Yeah, there's a chapter in my book where the first sentence is the term passive investment is the biggest lie in CRE. There's nothing passive about it. This morning, before we talk, I had to go on over to one of our shopping centers and look at trash enclosures. This gets, you got to get your fingernails dirty in this business. And the trash enclosures are okay, but we have too many bins. And so there's like one bin out. So I had to, with my property manager, how are we going to expand this trash enclosure? How are we going to keep this grease clean?
Yeah.
And then, okay, now here's the next problem to deal with. I mean, there's a problem every single day. There's absolutely nothing passive about real estate. Now, you can invest, you can treat it as a passive investment. You can just say, I'm going to invest with John or Gary and just send me my quarterly checks. But that's not how it works. The roofs always need to be replaced. Sidewalks get cracked. Tenants come and go. I'm dealing with, on another center of ours, I'm dealing with a tenant just announced it's in bankruptcy and they want a 50% cut in rent. And so then we have to think about it and say, do we give this guy any leeway, or do we say, get the hell out and we will find a new tenant? And the answer to that, of course, is what are our options? If he's the only train in the station, then we'd give him a rent break. But fortunately, it's a good center, and we'll probably let them go. But every single day, and another thing, so I address this in property management. You can say to yourself, gee, I'm going to hire outside property managers so I can sit on the beach and drink my Coco Locos. But that doesn't work either.
Nope.
You have to manage the managers. In fact, the center I looked at, we have an outside property management company, but you've got to look at your properties. I would say, if you're really doing it right, you should look at each of your properties or have your employees do it every single month. Make sure that the landscaping's being done, the garbage is being picked up, that there's no graffiti issues, and so on, and that the tenants are doing well.
Would be remiss if I didn't mention one of my own experiences dealing with trash cans. We had a fourplex on a corner. On one other corner was a restaurant. The other two corners were residential. And I got tired of neighbors taking advantage of the dumpster. They would figure out the code, somebody give them the code. So I went to the city and said, what can I do? And here's I could build something on the side like a box that only the tenants would have access to, that kind of thing. They said, well, you can't do that because there's parking. Ultimately, what it came down to is I had to put it out front of the building, which is the worst place to put any kind of a trash can assembly. But it's because that's where the garbage trucks came on their route.
Right.
They wouldn't go behind the building or beside the building. And they said, by the way, you can't build a contraption in front of your house. I'm like, you mean I'm going to leave trash cans for 4 units sitting out there in the yard for everybody to see. So we finally figured out what to do. We built a ramp because we converted one of the first floor units into a beauty shop. We had to
Mhm.
do all the commercial plumbing and all that. And I said, look, we need some landscaping. What if I built a container for the cans and put landscaping around it? Am I allowed to landscape? And so the
Right.
first thing was get the approval on the landscaping. We finally got that. And I said, now that I'm landscaping and I've got these, 4 or 5 foot high shrubs, can I put something in there as long as it's not visible to the street? And it finally said, yes, we'll let you do it. And after a year, we finally solved the trash can problem. So it's just, the point is, it's not passive.
It's not. I have another solution to that because our shopping centers are fairly large, and so back of them, there's a lot of room, and we have a problem with exactly this: people dumping mattresses or dumping stuff in
Yeah,
our bins. So now the things are getting more high tech. So we have both cameras that over the critical areas with loudspeakers, so that if you pull up in your pickup truck and you start to and they're monitored by live security people, it's somewhere, maybe in Idaho, I don't know.
Mhm.
But if you start to push the mattress off your truck, the loudspeaker says, "Hey, you, Jack, put that
Yeah,
back in the truck, or we're calling the cops." That kind of works, but
nice.
it's constant. There are few days where there isn't some kind of headache with real estate, but it's a great
Yeah,
business, and I love it.
yeah. Hey, well, speaking of headaches, let's. I've got another good one for you. I mean, I always learned to build healthy relationships with municipal employees, the local politicians, the boards, zoning boards, occupancy inspectors, and things like that. But when it comes to City Hall, to me, I just never, John, I had some success, but I was never able to have that ability to just have a handshake, walk in, and get where I want, kind of thing. What would you tell people who are investing, what to expect and what they can do when it comes to hard scrabble politics in real estate, when it comes to that type of thing?
So, Gary, you're talking about you buy a piece of land or an old building, you want to tear it down, you want to do a brand new project. Is
Really anything that has to do with City Hall. I mean, it's so political.
yeah,
And I've been to zoning hearings where I got completely shut down in some municipalities. I mean, it didn't matter how much money I spent. I had the best lawyer. And others, it's just like, sure, come on in and let's talk about it. We'll see what we can do, and might have a public hearing, but they would preface it like this is a good thing for the community. But it's the politics that drove me absolutely batty. And I didn't feel like I wanted to play we call it the greaser game out east, like in Philly, they call it greasing somebody. I used to think greasing meant they no longer are alive, but what they mean is you grease their palm, you give them some money. And I was
right.
always afraid to do that. I'm not that happens in the Bay Area, but when it came to that type of thing, like your example, like a new development or you're repurposing property, what's the best advice you could give somebody? Because it wasn't ever easy for me. I had to jump through some serious hoops to get
Yeah,
anything like that approved.
it is It's so complicated that I devote several chapters to it. But in short, uh,
Mhm.
what you do is what I would do is figure out who kind of runs the city. Is it the mayor, or is it the city manager, or is it the city council, or is it the planning commission? That has the most power. I would go to them and say, this is a courtesy. Here's what this 10 acres, I'll use my world. I'd like to build a shopping center here. What do you think of this? Do you think that we can do this? And if they say, yeah, maybe, then you say, okay, we're going to honor the process. And, so you start at the top, and then you tell the top, we're going to start at the very bottom, go to the counter at the planning department and submit. And then before we even do that, we're going to go to the neighbors. Because you have to in California, and I don't know about the East Coast, but I'm guessing
Yeah,
it's
you
pretty
do.
much
Yeah.
the same.
Mhm.
I think you gain 5 pounds doing this because you say, neighbors, we're going to have a coffee and donuts, and then you put up your project. You try to get as many of them as you can, and then you try like hell, Gary, to get a few real supporters. Much harder to get supporters than opponents. Opponents, dime a dozen. But
All right.
if you can get some real supporters, you say, look, here's how the town's going to benefit from this. So,
Mhm.
and then when you go to the planning commission, you say, because the neighbors will come with you, and if you've got some support, you're way ahead of the game. We try always, And in California, for the bigger cities, it's 3 steps. There's an architectural review, is the lowest. Well, first is the planning department where you submit. Then there's architectural review. Then there's planning commission, and then there's city council. So, and so these guys are all pretty much volunteers, and they're usually, let's face it, not that gifted in real estate or business, and they're harried. So I try every single time, and it's a pain in the ass, and it's a lot of effort to meet each single one of them in advance. And so, okay, you 5 members of the architectural review board, one at a time, I'd like to come in and just explain my project to you. And get your feedback. What you want, of course, is some co-authorship where they say, well, if you tweak this, I'd kind of like it. Sometimes some cities won't even allow you to do that, which is a pain. And sometimes they'll say, gee, I don't have the time to meet you, but then we at least send them a letter that says, here's our project, here are all the benefits of it, hope you consider it. So we do that at each level. And then, if we get past the architectural review, same thing with the planning commission, same thing with the city council. But I think the important part is to get some buy-in. I'll tell you a trick I used once. I had a very contentious project here in Palo Alto that just took, you won't believe it, but from the time I first saw it until the time we cut the grand opening ribbon was 18 years. And we just went back and forth, and it was a great project. But at one point, I needed to get supporters, and I had, let's say, a dozen real disinterested supporters. But then I called the contractor, the architect, my property managers, and I said, I need to fill this room, guys. And I still kind of feel guilty about this. We got everybody T-shirts, that let's say all blue, like at a basketball game. We got everybody blue T-shirts that said, support our project. And then I got up and I said, ladies and gentlemen, of the city council, you're all too busy. I don't want all of my supporters to get up and use their 3 minutes, and I don't want to be here till 2 a.m. So I'm just asking them to stand up and show their support and then sit down. That way they didn't have to reveal that they were somehow interested, or actually some of them were from out of town. So,
wow. So that's a good one.
There's and we did get it finally approved. But it is hard.
But that's a golden nugget right there. I appreciate that, I know we're going to run out of time here. Probably I knew it's going to go fast, but one more question, and I have a kind of a plug for all the agents out there listening, how they can participate in this and be part of the success. But before we get there, today's market is, at least like any market, we try to figure it out. We really can't, because things always seem to change right in front of us. But it's what I would consider a low volume market. We're not in a recession right now, but real estate is in what I call a volume slump. But regardless of any type of a down market, we know we're going to have it. When people ask me, hey, Gary, are we going to have a recession? I'm like, we absolutely are. And they say, when do you think it's going to be? I was like, I don't have a clue, but it's going to happen. So what can you tell people about surviving and winning, by the way, in a down market?
Well, first and foremost, if you have a day job, keep it in a down market. I would do everything I can to. One of our strategies is to have as little leverage, as little debt as possible. The other thing in a down market, what you want to do is take a hard look at your development deals, and do they really make sense? Would it be a good idea to I hate to say it, but let's say you've got $50,000 hard and non-refundable up with your seller, or you have that much in architectural and engineering fees. It's one of the hardest things to do is to walk away, from a loss. But in a down market, that's often the time to do it. The other thing to do, if you're in an escrow and the market is soft, and I totally agree with you right now, the volumes are off, residential sales are off. It's a tricky time right now. As you go back in and you sit down with the seller, if he or she will meet with you and say, here, my cards are face up on the table. Things have dropped 10 or 15%. I cannot do this deal on these terms. We need to renegotiate. Now, you have to, I wouldn't call it a bluff, but if the guy says, no way, I'm not renegotiating, then you need to be prepared to take a walk. but you
Right.
can go back in. It's never a good idea in my view, to tie something up at, say, at $5 million with the idea, because you're just trying to beat all the other buyers, to go in and screw the guy later down to 4 million. But if you can find something legitimate that actually lowers the value of the property, in this case, let's say a recession, very difficult time to raise equity right now, then you go back in and you can honestly say, gee, Mr. Seller, it was worth 5 million under those conditions, but today it's not. That's what I would do.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm thinking of some other old lessons too, and I've been through. This is my fifth market cycle, and probably for you too, probably maybe sixth market cycles. I think you started at 50.
I lost count.
Yeah, but what's interesting is in the early days, I don't know if you remember this, John. I used to get nervous when I'd watch the news and they're saying, "Oh, we're in a recession." Like, "Oh crap, this really stinks." But statistically, it was usually very mild. It wasn't like a big. I mean, yeah, maybe things are down 10% or 20%, but that means 80% of the market's still going pretty good. Even in the Great Recession, transaction volume was down 25%. But that means 75% of transaction volume was still intact. And yet half the agents left the business, you know? So in any case, for me on the investing side, in one or two recessions, I was unlucky. And in a couple of recessions, I was lucky because I learned from the earlier ones. And I learned to really, whatever cash I accumulated, I would keep it deployed in other ways that were, not real estate related. But and then what happened is when the market turned down, I had dry powder. I had assets. I had cash I could tap into. Another thing was keeping my credit clean. I made sure I was always had the top credit score because if I had to borrow even in a down market, I'd have the credit rating to show for it, plus cash, plus a whole bunch of properties. And it wasn't easy to do. What I did is I said, you know what? I'm going to start with some cash that I had and put down 20% so I can get a better bank note on the other 80%. And then I started doing that in 15-year terms instead of 30-year terms, and I did 20-year terms too. But I was able to always do like you did. I would buy low, remodel, raise the value, raise the rents, made them more valuable. So I accumulated a lot of equity, and I would get what's called a commercial line of credit against the various properties. And I've had people say you can't do that. And I say, well, I'm actually doing it right now. So I would get a line of credit. And by the way, the lender that did that for me, every time I added a new income producing asset, he would increase the line of credit. That was when I hit my tipping point. But I kept the ratio of, my debt was never more than 1/3 of my income, and my liability was never more than 2/3 of my total net worth. And those were starting over years. I would pare those down to make myself even more comfortable. Eventually got to the point where, I was able to, repurpose and cash out and do things like that. But in any case, I want to get one more thing, and I know we're right at the half-hour mark, but everybody listen here. This is for all you brokers out there and agents who are wondering, how can you participate in the kind of things that John and I are talking about? So, John, can you shed any light on that? How can a good agent or a good broker figure out how to find a way for them to participate in these deals?
Sure, I'll go at it from the other direction, but end up in the same spot. So we're a very, very well-known, but a smaller regional player here in Northern California in the shopping center business. There are far larger public companies that are in the same space. So how do I compete with them? How do I talk Gary or another good broker into bringing me the business? I tell them, guys, if you bring me the deal, if you just call me about a deal that everybody doesn't already know about, somehow it's off market or somehow forgotten, I'll give you 5% of the back end of the deal. After we get our capital back, let's say we put up $1 million and it's a 10% return. After we get our $1 million plus the 10%, whatever that profit is, you're in for 5%. If you do more than that, let's say again in retail, you show me an old building and you say, John, here's the building, here's the guy you can buy it from, and here's the tenant. I'll make up a Walmart that you can put in there. It will give somebody 15, 20% of the deal because they've shown us the opportunity and the solution. I love doing that. We've done that, I don't know, 20 times. And, I've got one broker who showed us a shopping center in Petaluma, a Northern California town.
Hmm.
I think he makes 50,000 a year off of from starting it 20 years ago when
Nice.
he showed us this center. But I think you can't do it with big brokerage firms, and you can't do it with big development firms. But I have found that the deals that we like, we tend to buy through the smaller shops, the guys with the really good local knowledge. And so if I were a broker, I would try to pick out a smaller developer with a good reputation. And I'd say, here, if I find you this deal, can I get a piece of it? Or take it a next step. Can I invest? I don't want my whole $100,000 commission. I'd like to invest it with you on an equal pari passu basis. And guys, the developers will like that. We're constant. What constrains us is not money so much. Usually, it's finding good deals, and the brokers are the ones who are out there who are going to find those deals. So I would not be bashful at all about suggesting, if I bring you this deal, can I get a piece of it?
I love the approach. I've actually done that before, and I'm not in production now, but I do get involved with friends, actually, clients who have become good friends of mine in one of some of their development deals. And there's one right now where really all I'm doing is I'm saying, look, I'll do my role, play my role as a broker, bring it all together, bring in the parties. But really what I really want is I want to help my team out. So on the back end, I'd like to have the listing agreements for everything that's, 26 stories, everything we're going to be selling. I'd like the leasing agreements for everything we're going to be leasing out in perpetuity. And if we can have, renewals every 5 or 10 years or something, if you're not happy. So, I benefit because my agents will benefit, and I'm foregoing any immediate compensation or commission for a long-term gain, because I know if I can do that, I make a lot more believers out of a lot more agents. A lot of them just get defeated. They leave after a couple of years. You just got to help them have some success and get through the tough times, like we talked about, John. You got to really, getting through the tough times. They call it tough for a reason, but the strong survive. And there's always a way. Like my last thing my mother ever told me was this. She said, "Gary, everything's going to be okay." And I use it all the time with my agents. I said, "Look, it really is. I mean, look, you're still here, John. I'm still here. I'm 63. I feel like I got plenty of gas in the tank, and Lord knows what's going to come in the next. Maybe I'll be here 30 more years. Who knows? I know what I've been through in the past. As painful as it was, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the things. So every step was part of the journey, for good or bad, and it just always works out. You just got to have that positive outlook. Never give up. In any case, we're going to try to wrap this up, John, but I want to let you have the last word. Any like something famous you learned from your granddad or your first employer, your mom, something that really, like what I just shared about my mom, something that kind of carries you forward,
Yeah, well, one day I was complaining about the usual issues to deal with business, and she said, "Johnny, if you don't have any problems, you don't have any business. It just comes with it.
It does.
No problems, no business." I thought, she's right. We just got to struggle through it every single day. But it's fun. It's what I love to do.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I will tell everybody here, not to burst any bubbles out there, but you may think when you learn how to make more money, your problems will go away. They don't.
No,
they just get bigger. You just become better at handling them, So, but in any case, hey, let's do one more mention of the book here. So, guys, it's called Making It in Real Estate. Hey, John, can they go to Amazon, or is there a website? Where's the best place for them to get the book?
Yeah. Okay. So just to clarify, that it just occurs to me that for those of you who are listening to it and not watching it, it's called Making It in Real Estate: Thriving as a Developer. It's the third edition. The first two editions, what I've done, I did the first edition 10 years ago, the second 5 years ago. The third encompasses those two editions, but it has it has another book's worth of chapters. Again, I mentioned a whole section on my worst mistakes, a whole section on property management, thriving as a developer. You can buy it online, Amazon. You can go to my website, John at johnmcnellis.com, and purchase it there if you like. You can buy it in bulk. It's out in audio, ebooks, and paperback. And for those of you watching, it's the red version, Making It in Real Estate.
I like it.
If you do listen to it, unless you're JK, I say making it in real estate is hard. Well, making it in publishing is hard too. And so unless you're JK Rowling or somebody, it is tough getting noticed. So if you do read it and like it, please give me a review on Amazon. I would really appreciate it. And Gary, this has been a lot of fun chatting with you today.
I agree, John. Been one of my favorite ones, favorite interviews. So, and for everybody listening, we appreciate you too. Please keep in reviews. Please leave a review because you got a lot of golden nuggets today, especially you brokers and agents out there. You just got a big tip from one of the best teachers in this field out there. I mean, think of it. His book is in all those universities, top-notch Ivy League universities. I think you should get the book. So, in any case, God bless you and all of you and all your families, and we will see you on the next Massive Passive Cashflow Podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Massive Passive Cashflow. Be sure to go to realestatewithgarywilson.com to join our community and start building wealth today.